And moving from Armenia, I want to move on to China. 13 minutes past the hour. With BBC Monitoring's Kerry Allen taking a look at the region for us. Chinese President Xi Jinping has been marking what he has called a moment in history. He says his country has achieved the miracle of eradicating extreme poverty. His government says over this 8-year period, nearly 100 million people have been lifted out of poverty. Kerry, this sounds like the most incredible achievement. But what do you think the president means by extreme poverty?
Well, the way China defines extreme poverty, well, in general in China, there are two kinds of poverty. There's urban poverty and rural poverty. Urban poverty is very much, looking at rising unemployment in cities and income gaps. Rural poverty is extremely poor people in China's southern and western regions where there's a lot of mountains and the weather is extreme and it's very difficult for people to live in general. Extreme poverty is defined in China by people's earnings, which is a less than $620 a year. That's just over $50 a month. So he's saying now that in China, in these rural regions, people have been pulled out of this bracket of salary, that they're above this now.
Right, so kind of we often hear about that measure of $1 a day, so to speak, so it's probably only just a little bit more than that if we're talking about extreme poverty. I was looking at one of our colleagues, John Sutterworth, did this video that's up online, speaking to people as this measure was beginning to take hold in the country to see could President Xi do this. And the conditions were so extreme, people that were living in very basic houses with their animals and then instead being moved to these more, established houses, communities away from the rural areas. How is it seen in China, this initiative?
Well, I mean, if you look on platforms like Sina Weibo today, China's version of Facebook or Twitter, all you will see are praise for the government doing this. And I do think that there is a certain amount of government backing for this because this has been a huge initiative under President Xi Jinping since he came to power in 2013. He's been wanting to make the point that China has recovered it. It's become this growing superpower and it's becoming stronger. It almost feels in a way like it's a message to the US about China growing in strength. But yeah, there have been these shocking images for a while in rural China for years of, some of the footage I've seen, children climbing down rickety ladders in mountainous regions to go to school and walking for miles on end. There was a child about 2 or 3 years ago who went viral he became known as Ice Boy because he literally had arrived at school and his hair had fully turned white. And so there have been discussions in China in recent years about poverty, very much targeting children as well. The fact that, you have these images in China of children still, even in recent years, going to extremes just to get to school.
And does it feel within the country, such a huge country, but that the economy is bringing people along, that they are, that there's not the inequality or perhaps the left behind that we often hear about in other countries?
I don't know. I mean, I think nowadays, much like everywhere, people feel poorer in other ways. So, the coronavirus has led to job losses in urban areas. But at the same time, in rural areas, China has been growing in other ways. It's been opening up and allowing people to have mobile access and internet access. This has been a growth area. There have been two things here. I mean, in urban society, people now are suffering from more mental illness and that they're working longer hours because China's population is shrinking because of the one-child policy. There are now many more people in the kind of elderly category than there are now in kind of middle-aged Chinese people. So, yeah, I mean, there are problems there in urban society, but in rural society, yeah, there are improvements. And but at the same time, yeah, there are still these phenomena in China that you don't get in other countries. One in particular, what's known as left behind children. You've still got the case that a lot of people, particularly in these poor areas, these rural areas of China, migrants who go into urban sectors because there's so much growth there, and China's been growing very, very rapidly over 30 years, to be able to send money back. So you've got the case that there are loads of children in China, in these very, very poor regions, who they barely see their parents because their parents are working elsewhere to be able to provide for them.
Yeah, and it's really quite something, Kerry, when we think of, I met one guy who was a taxi driver in Ireland. He's like, I'm from a small city of 10 million people, living in a country of 4 million. I suppose the growth of cities is something that our listeners also need to keep in mind as they think about exactly poverty or wealth when it comes to China.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, yeah, there are other problems now that people can't get on the housing ladder that you see in the West as well, that yeah, China's economy has grown so quickly, but people's incomes haven't really kept up with it. And growing inequalities all the time. I think, even though this is a communist country, and actually a country that's had a history of famine, I mean, we go back to the Great Leap Forward era and the kind of Mao Zedong era. This was the largest famine in human history. There were between 15 and 55 million deaths. So China's, not wanted to, kind of focus on that. It's wanted to, try to look at what Xi Jinping's done in contrast to become this new great leader. So, yeah, I mean, there have been some discussions taking place about whether he's trying to cultivate a new cult of personality, so to speak, by being basically trying to repair the damage that was left over by the original Communist Party leader.
Kerry Allen, thank you so much. Good to have you on with us. And that is a story that has garnered a lot of interest, eradicating extreme poverty, of course, a lofty goal. Thanks very much for telling us how it has been seen